tell Hunter Roadie. Go tell Hunter Roadie. Go tell Hunter Roadie that everybody's dead.
With it being about a year since Resident Evil 7 released, it's time to start talking about the next title in the series, Resident Evil 8. Resident Evil 8 has the potential to be the greatest Resident Evil yet, and with the positive feedback 7 has received, this could really help Capcom create a masterpiece. Now going back to 7, it was obviously a substantial change to the franchise, going from third to first person perspective, and having much less action-packed gunplay with more of a horror survival theme. And that was a great decision made by Capcom. It definitely gave the series a fresh start, and now it's time for Capcom to build off of that and add things that were definitely needed in 7. Let's start with the location. So some people are hoping for the return of Raccoon City in the next title, or a similar big apocalyptic city. I prefer them to keep the location as isolated as possible. Isolation brings out that feeling of helplessness and really helps with the atmosphere when it comes to games like Resident Evil. I thought 7's location was brilliant, but it was a little too small. I think a location like Resident Evil 4's map would be a great for Resident Evil 8. Maybe a rural area in the middle of nowhere with various locations throughout the map, including small creepy towns. Or maybe even an isolated location up in the mountains somewhere. There's plenty of ominous areas they could place the game, but I really do hope they increase the size from 7's location, keeping it linear but also open at the same time. With the story, I don't think it should be a sequel or prequel of any kind. The main formula to Resident Evil is a person having to deal with a difficult, life-threatening situation. I don't think it matters if any iconic characters return, even though I wouldn't mind seeing Leon as a protagonist once again. But as long as they keep the formula like they did in 7, I think the story will work out fine as a standalone. When it comes to the storyline, I would love to see Capcom throw in more mystery and take the game to the past like the early 1900s. Rather than the game showing you who the enemy is, I think it would be an interesting twist if we had to figure out who and what was causing the havoc in the next title. Maybe a detective that was sent out to check out a reported plague infecting a town, making its victims go insane. With multiple AI in the town who you're able to speak and interact with and ask them questions about the plague the first day, then you wake up the next and everyone has been infected. And the only information you have now is from what you gathered from the people the day before. And now the player is stuck there not knowing what the hell is going on. I'm not saying the story should have that exact same layout. I'm definitely not a story writer, but something similar would be very interesting. Mystery in a horror survival game is key. The more the merrier, and I think the early 1900s would be perfect for Resident Evil, and I would love to see what Capcom could do with that time period. And this leads into the puzzle solving aspect of the game. Resident Evil is known for its amazing puzzle solving gameplay. Resident Evil 7's puzzles were decent, but not as difficult as I anticipated them to be. I would love to see more of a challenge and in-depth puzzle solving in Resident Evil 8. For example, a puzzle having multiple parts, with each part not being able to be figured out until progressing farther into the game, gathering clues from different areas of the map, and having that epiphany feeling when you finally get the last clue that solves the puzzle. Puzzles that really make us think outside the box and not just fitting objects into a shadow. Although the puzzle with the birthday cake was brilliant, and I hope to see more of those types of puzzles in Resident Evil 8. I think it's crucial that they keep Resident Evil 8 first person. I've never been so immersed and frightened in a game until Resident Evil 7, and the main part of that immersion was from the game having a first person perspective. It gave the game so much more than it could have ever had in third person, and plus it's great for VR. With Resident Evil 7, Capcom completely reimagined the series and developed a true survival horror game, and I don't think they could have delivered the same atmosphere they did if they had gone with a third person perspective. So I'm really hoping Resident Evil 8 sticks with first person. One thing Resident Evil 8 does not need from 7 is that short 10-hour long story. I really think the sweet spot for a Resident Evil game is around 20 hours for the main story to be completed. That's around how long it takes to complete Resident Evil 4, which felt just right. It's not at the point where it feels like it's dragging on, and it's definitely not too short. Resident Evil 8 deserves a story longer than 10 hours, and I'm sure the developers have read the feedback about how Resident Evil 7 fell a little short. Another mechanic Resident Evil 8 needs to bring back to the series is inventory upgrades and management. Nothing is more satisfying than organizing your weapons and equipment inside your inventory case and saving up currency to purchase an upgraded case. And in order to fill up our case, Capcom, we're going to need more guns and equipment. Resident Evil 7 lacked a lot of weapons. It basically only provided enough guns to survive with. And I get that. It was a small enclosed map for the most part, so tons of guns weren't needed. And I also understand they don't want the player to feel like a superhuman running around killing everything with military gear. All I'm saying is that Resident Evil 8 needs variety. Balance the weapons out to where we always feel vulnerable, make ammo scarce, and basically make all equipment very difficult to obtain. Make the player have to go out of their way to find or figure out how to get special items. Weapon upgrades and attachments also need to make a return. And what better way to do this than to introduce a new merchant?
What are you buying?
Resident Evil 8 is due for proper safe zones and merchant bargaining, but I don't think it should offer too many perks, again emphasizing the balance between player vulnerability and power. Since Resident Evil 8 will most likely carry in 7's footsteps as a true survival horror game, it wouldn't be good to give the player too much power, at least in the first half of the game. However Capcom decides to implement a variety of weapons and equipment, I hope they manage to do it in a way where the player is only rewarded with stronger weapons for solving difficult puzzles or discovering secret locations throughout the story, giving a real incentive for players that like to check every square foot of the game. I don't think we should be able to buy weapons from the merchant, but I do think weapon upgrades, inventory upgrades, and maybe some sort of player perks should be able to be purchased at high prices. That way the player will not be able to obtain everything with one playthrough of the story. And on a side note, I believe that items, currency, and herbs should be able to be found not only around the map, but also from killing enemies. In Resident Evil 7, I often found myself avoiding enemies and ignoring them, not because I was afraid nor because I didn't have ammo, just the fact that there was no incentive or reward for killing them. There definitely needs to be some sort of recognition for killing enemies in Resident Evil 8. And going back to the variety of weapons again, obviously if there are going to be guns like sniper rifles, that means the game's location will have to be more open and less enclosed than Resident Evil 7 was. An open but linear location for Resident Evil 8 would not only be amazing visually, but also intense in first person. And plus it'd give us the ability to get those long range headshots. When it comes to enemies in Resident Evil 8, I believe it should consist of not only more as in actual numbers, but also more types of enemies as well. Give us some enemies that can only be defeated with exclusive ways, where even an unlimited amount of ammo won't do us any good, making the player look around the environment for further assistance. Give us some enemies that are so dangerous that it's mandatory to avoid them, giving the game more sneaking and survival mechanics. And of course, provide the enemies that can be taken out with some good shots from weapons. Resident Evil 7 had a fair number of enemies, but since the game was rather short, there was also a short supply of enemy variety. So with Resident Evil 8, which hopefully will have a much longer story, this will allow the developers to implement more unique enemies within the game. Moving on to replay value, something Resident Evil 7 lacked. It's really simple to give a series like Resident Evil replay value. You complete the story once, that should unlock two things. A new game mode, which for Resident Evil 8 unarguably should be Mercenaries, and also a hard mode of some sort for the main story. And if the player decides to start another game in normal mode, they should start out with everything they had in their inventory when completing the game the first time. And of course, completing Mercenaries in hard mode definitely should reward something special like new weapons. Resident Evil 7 had some replay value, don't get me wrong, but it was disappointing in my opinion. I didn't even touch the game after the first playthrough. I just didn't feel like the rewards were worth the required achievements. So those are some of the important things that I and hopefully some of the community wants to be present in Resident Evil 8. This is going to be one, if not the most highly anticipated Resident Evil title ever, due to the fact that Resident Evil 7 was such a different game than we all expected. It turned out to be a very solid Resident Evil title, and it opened up so many opportunities for the franchise going forward. So everything is up in the air for Resident Evil 8, and like I said before, just looking at some of the minor flaws in 7, this could really help Capcom create a masterpiece. And with Shinji Mikami possibly returning to direct Resident Evil 8, anything is possible. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. It really helps me out a lot. And before we go, make sure to subscribe here at Roger Productions for more Resident Evil 8 content just like this. And also, let me know down in the comment section below what you want to see in Resident Evil 8. Other than that, guys, I will catch you in the next video.